Picture this, you're 20 miles off the coast of Alaska. Steel gray water in every direction, all the way to the horizon. A commercial fishing boat is rocking in the swell, its deck slick with salt water and fish scales. A deckhand who's been hauling nets for 14 hours straight finally gets a break. He steps into a closet-sized room below deck, shuts the door, and does what every human being on Earth has to do a few times a day. And here's the question almost nobody stops to ask. When he flushes, where does it actually go? There's no sewer line out here, no septic tank buried in a yard, no treatment plant humming somewhere in the distance. Just the boat, the crew, and hundreds of miles of open ocean. The waste has to go somewhere. And the answer isn't simply over the side. The real answer is stranger, more regulated, and honestly more clever than most people would ever guess. There are 3 layers to this story. The first is what happens on the small boats, the ones most of us actually picture when we hear fishing boat. The second is an invisible line drawn across the entire ocean that decides what's legal and what isn't. And the third is what happens on the giant vessels, where the truth about human waste and the sea gets genuinely surprising. By the end of this video, you'll never look at a fishing boat or a seafood dinner quite the same way again. Let's start small. Most fishing boats in America aren't enormous factory ships. They're under 65 feet. Small crews, tight quarters, and not a lot of room for plumbing. On a lot of these boats, the bathroom situation is about as basic as it gets. On the smallest boats, there often isn't a real toilet at all. There's a bucket. Fishermen even have a blunt name for it, the bucket and chuck it method. You do your business, and the contents go over the side. It sounds crude, and it is. But here's the part that changes how you think about it. The thing most people assume is the gross part, the urine, is basically sterile. It's the feces that carry the actual problem: bacteria, pathogens, and nutrients that can feed algae blooms and choke the life out of shallow water. That single fact is the reason every rule you're about to hear exists. Nobody wrote these laws to stop pee. They wrote them to keep human gut bacteria out of the water where people swim, fish, and pull up shellfish. So on boats that do have an installed toilet, and out here at sea they don't call it a toilet, they call it a head, the waste doesn't just vanish. It has to be dealt with. And that brings us to the second layer and the strangest part of this whole story. Because somewhere out on that water there's a line, you can't see it. There's no buoy, no sign, no rope. But it's there, and every captain knows exactly where it is. It sits 3 nautical miles from the nearest shore. And that line changes everything about what a boat is legally allowed to flush. Inside 3 miles, dumping raw, untreated sewage into the water is flat out illegal in the United States. It doesn't matter if you dropped a deodorizing tablet in first, it's still against the law. Cross that 3-mile line heading out to sea, and for many boats, the rules loosen. That's the boundary where the open ocean is considered big enough and deep enough to handle it. So how does a boat stay legal on the wrong side of that line? This is where the technology comes in, and it's a piece of equipment most people have never heard of. Tucked into the plumbing of a lot of these boats is a device roughly the size of a shoebox. When you flush, the waste doesn't go straight into a tank or straight into the sea. It gets pumped into this unit first, where a set of blades spinning at high speed pulverizes everything into a fine slurry. Then the slurry gets hit with a disinfectant, usually chlorine, sometimes generated right out of the salt water itself using electrodes, so there's nothing to refill. That's called a Type 1 marine sanitation device, and it's built for boats up to 65 feet. What comes out the other end is legally clean enough to discharge, even fairly close to shore. Bigger boats get a step up, a Type 2 device which uses actual living bacteria to biologically break the sewage down before disinfecting it, the same basic principle as a city treatment plant, shrunk down to fit on a moving vessel. And then there's the third option, the one that treats nothing at all. It's just a holding tank. A Type 3 device, it stores everything on board until the boat gets back to the dock, where it's pumped out at a shore station and trucked off to a real treatment facility. There are thousands of these pump-out stations across the country, a lot of them funded by a federal program specifically built to keep boater waste out of the water. Here's where it gets sneaky though. A lot of boats have both. They've got a holding tank and a valve, a Y valve, that can redirect the waste either into the tank or straight overboard. And that valve is exactly the thing the Coast Guard cares about. In protected waters and in special no-discharge zones where nothing can go over the side at all, it's not enough to just promise you won't dump. The law says that valve has to be physically locked shut, wire-tied, padlocked, or with the handle removed entirely. Because a valve you could flip is treated as a valve you would flip. So that's the small and mid-sized world, an invisible 3-mile line, a shoebox that grinds and disinfects, a holding tank, and a valve that has to be locked. But everything changes when the boat gets big, and this is the third layer, the one almost nobody expects. Once you're talking about a vessel over a certain size, the huge factory trawlers and processing ships that carry 15, 20, 50 people and stay at sea for weeks, you leave US coastal rules behind and enter a whole different rulebook, an international treaty called MARPOL. And MARPOL draws a second line much further out, 12 nautical miles. Beyond 12 miles, one of these big ships is allowed to discharge completely raw, untreated sewage directly into the ocean. No grinding, no chlorine, nothing. There are only two conditions. The ship has to be moving at least 4 knots, and it can't dump the whole tank at once. It has to release it slowly at an approved rate so it spreads out in the ship's wake instead of landing as one concentrated slug. And now you're probably thinking the same thing everyone thinks. That's insane. How is raw sewage into the ocean ever okay? Here's the answer, and it's the part that reframes this entire video. The open ocean out past that 12-mile line is essentially the largest and oldest sewage treatment system on the planet. Out there, the water is deep, cold, constantly moving, and absolutely full of naturally occurring bacteria whose entire job is breaking organic material down. Diluted across that much water and moving at speed, a small stream of human waste gets consumed and dispersed by natural bacterial action, the same process that's been running in the sea for millions of years. That's not a loophole someone snuck into the law. That's the actual reasoning behind the law. The rules aren't about treatment, they're about distance and dilution. And there's a final twist that even a lot of boaters don't realize. On some of these big vessels, the fancy onboard treatment plant can legally be switched off once the ship is past 12 miles, because at that point, it doesn't need it. The ocean does the work for free. So the next time you're standing on a pier watching a fishing boat chug back in with its catch, think about what's actually happening out there. There's an invisible 3-mile line, and a second one at 12. There are shoebox-sized machines quietly grinding and disinfecting. There are valves locked shut by law. And there's the open ocean doing exactly what it's done since long before we ever built a toilet. It's not chaos, it's a system. A weird, mostly invisible, surprisingly thought-out system floating right under our feet. Now I want to hear from you. If you've spent time on a boat, what was the bathroom setup actually like? Be honest. And if you're watching this from dry land, does knowing all this change how you feel about the ocean or your next seafood dinner? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. If you learned something today, hit that like button. It genuinely helps more people find the channel. Subscribe for more, and I'll see you on the water.